Thank everybody for coming to last session of the Mississippi Legislature for 2021. So we were glad to, as my grandchild said, are y'all going to sine and die? And I said, I think so. So we did. Very pleased with the session. Those of you who followed the session this year, you will have noticed that we had a lot of policy that came out of the Mississippi Senate this year and addressed a significant number of issues. Very proud of my senators and what they did. Very proud of what we're going to do, and I want to go through some of those. I'm going to go through lightly what we did, and I'll answer any questions you might have. But first, I named the redistricting committee today. Unfortunately, they're telling us we will not get our numbers from the redistricting until approximately September the 30th. Even though that may be the case, you should anticipate we will have preliminary meetings and start the process in conjunction with our House, our compatriots in the House, to look at redistricting with a view towards having that done by the end of the year. That's very important. Of course, we have the congressional elections next year, and you'll have other elections going on, so we will need to do redistricting, and we have appointed our redistricting, and it's in a press release for y'all to pick up. We again expanded broadband this year, and I thought that was just unnecessary. Last year, as you remember, we put up about 65 to 70 million. The co-ops matched that. We got approximately 4,000 miles of cable land in Mississippi, Lake Mississippi, that is now providing broadband to thousands of children that did not have it before. It is a key to the future to me. You should anticipate we will continue to push that as part of the American Rescue Act. We get about 166 million that will be targeted for continued expansion of broadband in Mississippi. In addition to that, we work with Mississippi Power Company and Entergy this year to allow their dark fiber, the part of the fiber they're not utilizing, to start their various electrical stations that was not being used by them will now be able to be leased to the highest bidder. We're really excited about that. That will provide broadband to rural areas that really would never have seen it before. Every dollar of the rent we provided in the plan, every dollar of the rent will be utilized to reduce ratepayers' taxes. So there's no overhead in there or anything else. If they lease it for $100 or whatever the amount may be, $100 goes to reduce the ratepayers' amount they pay each year. Very proud of that. That is a future for Mississippi. That's something that we've emphasized, something you'll continue to emphasize. This year, education had its best year since probably since William Winter. We provided teacher pay raises this year, assistance raises this year. We provided over $35 million from the additional funds that were generated from the lottery. But in addition to the steps that were making by Senator DeBar and the Education Committee on the Senate side, in addition to those steps, education received $1.6 billion from the Rescue Act. Higher education got another $400 and something million from the Rescue Act. So in addition to the steps that we're making, just giant steps forward, I thought, on education for Mississippi, including the teacher pay raise before we ever knew there was going to be a Rescue Act. We did that. There's about $8 million in there for classroom supplies. Our teachers, many of them are using their own personal funds to provide everything from crayons to work paper for their students. $8 million is very important to them. We doubled their early childhood. Now, I have emphasized to you before, the best economic engine we have in Mississippi is the mind of a child. That's what's most important. Now, we did a tremendous amount of infrastructure work this year. We'll do even more with the new infrastructure bill. You saw a lot of the bond bill and our capital expense funds that were utilized to bring up parts of Mississippi to standard. Those pale when you think about the human mind. When we take that child from pre-K up through 18, 21 years old, their education time, we take that child, we have an economic engine in Mississippi for the next 50 years. For the next half a century, they will prosper. They will be your leaders, they'll be your mayors, your aldermen, your businessmen and women. All of that comes out of education. So when we talk about broadband and we talk about having teacher salaries increases and we talk about classroom supplies and we talk about early childhood education, all of those are the most important steps that the legislature took this year. And you will see those repeated again and again and again. They deserve, every one of those children deserves to have the opportunities you have, and I intend to make sure that happens. So we were pleased to reward the National Guard with an additional $5 million this year. All of us who have seen the National Guard working during the pandemic have been so impressed with the pandemic, the ice storm. Every time we need anybody, the National Guard's there. And the legislature, particularly the Senate, I think, wanted to make sure that they rewarded that. General Boyles, I've informed him of the additional funds will be available. Those will be utilized for repair and maintenance and upkeep on both existing facilities and new facilities in the state of Mississippi that support the National Guard. So 12,000 men and women that do that. Very pleased to be able to do that. That is a tremendous asset to the general, as we've discussed it, to allow those people to have those armories where they are up close to the people who actually serve there on the weekends and when we need them to do everything from pandemics to ice storms to hurricanes and tornadoes. So we felt very strongly about that and very pleased with that. In addition, we gave a pay raise, not across the board pay raise, we gave a pay raise to state employees. The department heads will decide and determine who gets what pay raises it should be. Some would deserve a higher pay raise than others, and we will leave that up to the people they work with to make sure those determinations are done well. Very appreciative of the Senate taking the position and the House taking the position that we needed an increased compensation for our employees. In addition to that, we were burdened, as all businesses are, with significant increase in healthcare costs. We did not pass those along. We covered those in our budget. So our department heads and our employees did not have to expend more money on healthcare than they had been expending in the past, and we covered that. Corrections were a major issue this year. Clearly, discussion started last year. A bill was passed, was sent in the House, vetoed by the governor, was sent back here. Senator Barnett and Senator Sparks on our side spent an untold amount of hours preparatory to this session. In meetings, we had hearings about what would work. We met with sheriffs, we met with district attorneys, we met with the corrections people, Commissioner Kane. We put together a plan that I believe will be satisfactory not only to the House and the Senate as we pass it, but also to the governor. In that plan, we addressed the fact that there are individuals who, as Commissioner Kane has put it to me, need to have some light at the end of the tunnel so that they utilize the time in which they're incarcerated to become job skilled and ready to re-enter society. And so with that, our nonviolent criminals are able to get out somewhat earlier, depending upon their particular time period of service, 25% or 10 years, whichever is lesser, and you'll see a graduated scale on that. I thought that was important, that we have a period in which someone can work through while they're incarcerated, and I thought it was critical that we have that individual have a job skill when they exit our correction authorities. Commissioner Kane shares that, so you'll see us preparing people to get out months before they ever get out with a skill so that they can come out and get back to work and rejoin society. We did things like give them a temporary license. They couldn't get to work. They couldn't get a license, so they couldn't get to work. So we passed legislation to get them to work. So all of these are with a view towards having individuals become productive members of society after they serve their time. Obviously there's an economic difference in those kinds of things, but the most important thing was to have people exit our corrections department that can go back into the workforce and become productive members of society. And I think we took long steps today to do that, this year to do that. On economic development, is one of the ones that I was particularly disappointed in. We had a program called MFLEX. It was passed by the Senate unanimously with that House. MFLEX would have armed our economic developers with the tools they needed to attract businesses and make us more competitive with all of our surrounding southeastern states. You should assume that that will be job one coming back next year. We anticipate that providing a simplified, easily understood process where a individual company could determine what benefits they would have coming to Mississippi, done in an expedited way without having to hire 87 consultants to do it, was very important. In actuality, the cost was either the same or less than what we're currently paying now, but the reception from companies that wanted to come to Mississippi that looked at the MFLEX program was outstanding. It had unanimous support from every economic developer, MDA and everybody else, every economic developer, and it did not pass out of the House. So we'll come back and try to find out the reasons that occurred, and we'll address them. We had, I think, in our budget for this year, the increases were really important. Some of the administrative things were important. We passed this out-of-state reciprocity for teachers, and you'll see the occupational licensing part, both in the Medicaid tech bill we'll talk about in a second, and in every other parts were expedited. If you got a license elsewhere and you don't have any complaints against you, whatever state you're in, we want to license you here in Mississippi, and we made reservations to do that. On the Medicaid tech bill, as you know, the Senate wanted to extend the postpartum. I was disappointed that we did not get that in the legislation. There was an expense for that, clearly, but I think some of the highest costs we got in Mississippi, y'all, is coming from underweight babies and moms that need some additional help after they've had their child. So I was disappointed that we did not get that. We got increases on other things in the Medicaid tech bill. I will have to compliment certainly Senator Blackwell, Representative Hood, who spent a tremendous amount of time in hearings and meetings. I sat in many of those with them on everything from managed care forward. And the medical tech bill, med tech bill is done, and I think will serve us well going forward. We'll talk about some of that in a minute. We changed the scope of practice for optometry. That had been percolating here literally for years. Chairman Bryan did a great job coming up to an agreement between our ophthalmologists and our optometrists what their scope of practice ought to be, what they were trained to do, how they could be better trained for them to do those kinds of things. Optometrists deliver a lot of the eye care, actually the majority of the eye care for most Mississippians around Mississippi. And so that needed to be acknowledged by that. And obviously your more intricate medical terms needed to be done by an ophthalmologist, and I think they reached a reasonable conclusion on that. I was pleased to get that through this year. We did expand the funding for community health services this year. I've visited several of those. Those are very important to Mississippi. There'll be something I'll talk about here in just a second. We had a rural truck program this year that I'm very excited about. That is something that's been going on. Commissioner Cheney has been doing. We will continue to provide fire trucks to rural fire departments. I think there's about 1,800 of them around Mississippi. They provide a tremendous service to Mississippians, in addition to holding down the cost of insurance. It's very important to us. We did a program where the MDOT could take their right-of-way, when they cut up right-of-way up to a small town, for example, they would cut off the bush hogs or whatever, and lock them up and drive through town and start on the other side of town. Well, we allow them now to go all the way through town to save cities and small towns and cities some money and expenses, makes the highways look better. It just made common sense, and by the time you did all that moving, it probably was more economical just to have them cut the grass all the way through, and we did that. So we're pleased with that. Small things that make big differences. We passed yesterday the road and bridge change in Mississippi. That was so important. We have been working on that about 2 years. we had met with Delta Council, with farmers around Mississippi, loggers, and all of this. Senator Branning did a great job on ferreting that through. And it involved an enforcement process, which has now been moved to the Mississippi Highway Patrol, so the governor signs it. And it involved weight limits and additional funds, about $79 million in additional funds to fix up bridges in Mississippi to take care of additional weight that farmers would be allowed to carry. We also increased the fines for any individuals that exceeded those weight limits. So we needed to tighten up the fines in the process, and then we also needed to provide our cities and our counties with enough money to address bridge repairs that they may deem appropriate. I think that will end up being a very helpful step for our farmers and also for our supervisors, so they get their monies to redo that. They also will have the ability to route, as they do now, to route trucks around certain areas. So I think that's going to be very important. We've got a couple of task force going on. We've got a family law task force. That's something, that's child alimony payments, child support payments. And it's time, I think, to take another look at that in Mississippi. Our senators are very interested in that. You'll see, as you have in the past, we'll have others, and I'll give you a couple of those now. That the actual family law was a part of that, I thought was important. When we do a study group, what we're doing is assimilating information for legislative changes. And now that will apply to that. You will see a tax study group come in from us, and hopefully from the House as well. As you know, we rejected the tax swap proposal that came a couple of weeks ago from the House side. It raised taxes on some people. The Mississippi Economic Council to AARP were all against that particular bill. It needed further work. You should anticipate it will receive that work from the Senate side over the summer coming into next year. The review of the tax structure of Mississippi, and particularly as we decreased everyone's taxes. As you know, the bill that was in the House increased about $250 million people's taxes. But I think our goal should be to reduce taxes. And so you will see us studying that. We don't have any preconceived notions about how that would go, other than we want it as a reduction. We have a blank sheet of paper, and we'll ask our best and our brightest, both academically, CPAs, members of the House and the Senate, to get together and address those issues and come back next year. We need to look in Mississippi at the delivery of health care. The delivery of health care is important. We have Mississippians, we have the most obese state, the most diabetic state, the most. Some of that is individual decisions, and our individuals have to get up and walk around the block. They have to take care. But in addition, they have to have access to adequate medical care. And that medical care, to me, means that you have, within a short driving distance, somebody that can provide you the normal day-to-day health care that you deserve as an individual. And in the event there's a need for an emergency, that you have within 30 minutes the ability to get to an emergency room. So we're looking at the delivery of health care here. I don't want to get, certainly don't want to get bogged down by some moniker as to what we may or may not be doing. And people say, I'm against this. Well, I don't know if you're really against that. If you really looked at what the delivery of health care involved, whether you may not be against that. You may be against this particular moniker. So we do want to look at the delivery of health care. Senator Blackwell did such a great job. Senator Bryan, who also did a great job on public health, will be leading that from the Senate side. And so we're looking forward to seeing where we lead with those particular study groups. Those used to be, I think they did a study group where they didn't want to do anything, just to kind of placate people. We don't. When we have a study group, we intend to have legislation that will evolve from that based upon the input, the aggregate intellect in Mississippi, which we have a lot of. So if you just ask people what to do and what they need, I think they'll tell you. And I think that will apply to each one of these events that I'm talking to you about today. So we had a very busy year, and very pleased with the legislation. Our, I think, really of great importance was I'm going to call it the mood of the Senate today. I saw a lot of handshakes, a lot of hugs, a lot of joy. Looking forward to a lot of positive statements that came out of my senators today, as they felt like they had debated the issues that came forth to them, and were leaving with a fraternal feeling, not so much an adversarial feeling. So very pleased with that, and I think that'll bode well for us to look at tax reform and other things we got coming up. You know, we'll approach it as a group without bringing in any ill will from a prior session. We're ready to go, and we're going to be ready to go next year.